When we hear about economic tools like tariffs, we usually picture this high-stakes game between nations, right? But what happens when one of those moves accidentally triggers a massive public health crisis? Today, we're going to look at how a simple trade policy can literally become a matter of life and death.
A distinct and preventable harm. That's how the researchers we're focusing on today describe the situation. Think about that. Not an unavoidable side effect, but a harm that is both specific and, crucially, one that we could have stopped. It immediately makes you wonder, right? What is this harm, and why aren't we preventing it?
So all of this comes from an urgent correspondence published in The Lancet, which, is one of the world's most respected medical journals. The analysis is from two researchers, Reza Mojdadzadeh and Mohammad Reza Farzanegan, who saw this crisis unfolding not on a battlefield, but hidden away in the fine print of economic policy.
So, what kicked this whole thing off? Well, it all started with a single, powerful announcement that sent some major shockwaves through the global trade system.
Here it is. A 25% tariff, but with this huge catch. It was extraterritorial. That meant it could apply to any company in any country that did business with Iran. Now, the source notes that it was all framed as trade diplomacy, but the details were left dangerously vague. And in the world of global finance and logistics, vagueness is basically poison.
So this move was aimed at international diplomacy, but its real impact landed somewhere else entirely. It created this hidden threat, not to governments, but to the health and well-being of ordinary people.
And here's the key question, probably the one you're thinking of right now. On paper, humanitarian goods, like medicine, are almost always exempt from these kinds of measures. So if the medicines themselves aren't the target, what's the problem? Well, the answer lies in a really subtle but powerful chain reaction.
And that brings us to the core mechanism driving this crisis. It's a phenomenon called the overcompliance effect. Let's break down exactly what that means. Basically, overcompliance happens when the rules are unclear, but the punishment for breaking them is really, really severe. So when companies are faced with that kind of uncertainty, they don't just try to comply, they overcomply. They take extreme measures just to be absolutely safe.
Now, what's so interesting here is how logical this is from a business perspective. Imagine you're a bank or a shipping company. You see this vague but massive tariff threat. The profits you might make from that one market are pretty small, but the penalty for making a mistake could be catastrophic. So what's the safest, most rational business decision? You just step away from that market entirely, even if that means stopping shipments of perfectly legal, life-saving medicines.
And this is the whole point. The companies are protecting themselves from financial risk, but the real-world consequence, the actual burden, lands squarely on the shoulders of patients needing treatment and the doctors just trying to provide it.
Okay, so let's move from the abstract idea of risk to the very real disruption of these fragile medical lifelines. What does this actually look like on the ground?
You see, the problem is that the goods most affected are also the hardest to replace. We're not talking about basic commodities here. We're talking about specialized vaccines, high-tech diagnostic equipment, and precision surgical tools. These are not things you can just buy from another supplier tomorrow. They need specific maintenance, regulatory approval, and reliable supply chains. When that chain breaks, it is a critical failure.
And to give you a sense of the scale, the authors cite some data. In October 2025, right before this tariff shock, Germany alone exported 18.7 million euros worth of pharmaceutical products to Iran in a single month. This isn't some small niche trade, it's a substantial flow of absolutely essential goods.
And this chart just drives the point home. That pharmaceutical trade plus other medical equipment accounted for over 40% of Germany's total exports to Iran that month. It shows just how critical the single trade corridor is for the health system. So when that flow is threatened by overcompliance, the potential for harm is just immense.
But the researchers don't just diagnose the problem. They offer a clear, actionable prescription for how to prevent this kind of harm. So let's look at their proposed blueprint. They propose a three-part plan. First, give banks and suppliers rapid, crystal-clear guidance so they know exactly what's legal and safe to ship. Get rid of the uncertainty. Second, create an independent body to proactively assess which medicines are most at risk of disruption. And third, monitor the health of the supply chain in real time, tracking things like shipping delays or rejected payments to catch problems early.
So the crucial point here is this paradigm shift. The authors argue that any major economic measure like this has to be treated as what it really is, a public health intervention. It needs the same kind of oversight, risk assessment, and mitigation plans that we would demand for any new drug or medical procedure, because the effects can be just as potent.
And that leaves us with this final, critical question. The story isn't just about one country or one tariff. It's about a fundamental challenge of our interconnected age. As economic and political tools become more powerful and far-reaching, how do we build the safeguards needed to ensure that the first casualties aren't the most vulnerable among us?